The orc woman rode into the valley on a gray warhorse that had seen better years, flanked by 24 warriors whose armor rattled like tin cans tied to a wedding cart. Zane Xander heard them coming long before he saw them, which gave him time to check the bread in the outdoor oven and decide whether to grab the hunting rifle his father had left him or just keep kneading the dough for tomorrow's loaves. He chose the dough. Wars did not stop a man from kneading breakfast. The riders pulled up at the fence line, and the woman in front dismounted with the kind of fluid grace that came from a lifetime in the saddle. She was tall, green-skinned, with small tusks that barely protruded past her lower lip and dark hair braided tight against her skull. Athletic, lean, and carrying herself like someone who had won too many fights to count, but had stopped enjoying the victories somewhere along the way. Her eyes were amber, sharp as hawk talons, and they swept over Zane's property with the cool assessment of a tax collector or a general. "You are Zane Xander," she said. "Not a question." "I am," Zane said. He did not stop kneading. The dough needed another 5 minutes, and interrupting now would make it dense. "My name is Orla Zareth. This valley has been contested land for 3 generations. Your grandfather took it from my grandfather. My father tried to take it back from your father. Now it falls to us." She rested one hand on the pommel of her sword. "The old laws say you have the right to defend your claim in combat. I have brought my champions. You will fight, or you will forfeit the land and leave by the next new moon." Zane considered this. He folded the dough over itself, pressed it down, turned it a quarter rotation. His hands were dusted white with flour. "How many champions?" he asked. "3. And if I win, then the land is yours without further challenge by right of arms." Orla's voice was flat, reciting terms she had clearly recited before. "If you lose, you leave, and the valley returns to my holding. And if I do not fight, then you forfeit." Zane nodded slowly. He shaped the dough into a ball and set it in a greased bowl, covered it with a damp cloth. Then he wiped his hands on his apron and looked up at Orla Zareth and her 24 warriors. They looked hungry. They looked like they had been riding hard and eating poorly. There were dark circles under more than a few sets of eyes, and at least 3 of the horses were too thin. "I will not fight," Zane said. A ripple went through the war band. Orla's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. "Then you forfeit," she said. "I did not say that either." Zane untied his apron. "You and your people look like you have not had a decent meal in a month. I have stew on the fire, bread in the oven, and a haunch of venison I was planning to roast tonight. Sit. Eat. We can talk about the valley after." The silence that followed was the kind that comes right before a thunderstorm or a bar fight. One of the warriors, a broad-shouldered orc man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, laughed outright. "You think you can buy us off with food? I think you are hungry," Zane said simply. "And I have food. It seems wasteful to let it go cold while we stand here arguing about dirt and old grievances." Orla stared at him. Her hand had not moved from her sword, but she had not drawn it either. "You are serious." "I am always serious about food," Zane said. "Fighting on an empty stomach is poor strategy. If you are going to take my land, you should at least do it after a good meal." Another long silence. Then Orla looked back at her band, and Zane saw the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing options, measuring risks. Finally, she nodded once sharply. "We will eat, but this changes nothing. The challenge stands." "Of course," Zane said. He gestured toward the long trestle table he had built under the oak tree, the one he used for outdoor meals when the weather was fair. "Sit. I will bring the food." They sat, though it took them a while to settle. Orcs were not accustomed to accepting hospitality from humans, and humans were not accustomed to offering it. But hunger was a universal language, and Zane had learned long ago that a full belly softened even the hardest heart. He had cooked for an army once, back when he was young and foolish enough to think war was glorious. He had learned better. He had also learned how to feed 200 men on short notice with whatever was available, and 24 orcs was nothing by comparison. He brought out the stew first, a rich venison stew thick with root vegetables and barley, seasoned with thyme and bay leaves. Then the bread, golden-crusted and steaming. Then roasted potatoes with rosemary, a salad of wild greens, pickled beets, fresh butter, honey, cheese. He kept bringing food until the table groaned under the weight of it, and the orcs kept eating until they groaned under the weight of it. Orla ate slowly, methodically, as if she were solving a puzzle with each bite. She did not speak, but her eyes never left Zane as he moved back and forth from the house to the table, replenishing dishes, refilling cups. The rest of her band was less restrained. They ate like starving wolves, and Zane suspected they were not far from it. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Orla asked finally, when the initial frenzy had subsided and her people were leaning back in their seats, eyes half closed in contentment. "Army," Zane said. He was sitting at the far end of the table now, a cup of cider in his hand. "I was a quartermaster's assistant during the border wars. 15 years ago. I learned that a well-fed soldier fights better than a starving one, and a well-fed soldier is less likely to desert. You fought in the border wars." The scarred orc man leaned forward, suddenly interested. "I cooked in the border wars," Zane corrected. "I am not much of a fighter, but I am a very good cook." "Why did you leave?" Orla asked. Zane took a sip of cider. "I got tired of feeding men so they could go kill other men. It seemed like a waste of good food." Orla's lips twitched, almost a smile. "So you came here." "My father left me this land. It is quiet. The soil is good. I grow what I need, raise a few animals, and do not bother anyone." He met her eyes. "I do not want to fight you, Orla Zareth. I do not want your land, and I do not care what your grandfather did to my grandfather. I just want to be left alone to cook and farm and live my life." "It is not that simple," Orla said. Her voice was quiet, almost regretful. "The old laws are clear. Contested land must be defended or forfeited. If I let you keep this valley without a fight, I show weakness. My people will question my leadership. Other claimants will come. The valley will never be at peace." "Then change the old laws," Zane said. Orla laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You do not understand. The old laws are all that hold us together. Without them, we are just scattered bands fighting over scraps. And with them, you are scattered bands fighting over scraps with rules," Zane said. "Seems like the same thing, only with more steps." The scarred orc man laughed again, louder this time. "He has a point, Orla." Orla shot him a look that could have curdled milk. Quiet Garak. But Garak was grinning now, emboldened by a full stomach and the obvious absurdity of the situation. "I am just saying, this is the best meal I have had in 6 months. Maybe we should let him keep the valley. He can cook for us." "We are not mercenaries for hire," Orla snapped. But there was no heat in it, and Zane saw the weariness in her eyes again. She was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the old laws, tired of being the person everyone expected her to be. "Stay the night," Zane said. "Your horses need rest, and so do you. Tomorrow we can talk about the valley, but tonight just eat and sleep. No fighting, no challenges, just rest." Orla looked like she wanted to argue, but her band was already nodding, already looking around for places to spread their bedrolls. They were soldiers, and soldiers knew the value of a safe place to sleep. Finally, Orla nodded. "One night, but tomorrow we settle this." "Tomorrow," Zane agreed. They settled in around the property, spreading bedrolls under the stars, tending to their horses, talking quietly among themselves. Zane brought out more blankets, more food, a barrel of ale he had been saving for winter. He moved among them like a host at a festival, making sure everyone had what they needed, answering questions about the valley, the weather, the best fishing spots in the river. Orla watched him from her seat at the table, her amber eyes thoughtful. When the last of her people had settled, she stood and walked over to where Zane was banking the fire for the night. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Zane looked up at her. "Doing what? This?" "The food, the hospitality. You know we came here to take your land. You know we could kill you in your sleep and be done with it. Why are you treating us like guests?" Zane considered the question. He poked at the coals, watched the sparks drift up into the night sky. "Because you are guests," he said finally. "You came to my home, you sat at my table, that makes you guests, not enemies. That is not how the world works. It is how my world works." Orla was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You are a strange man, Zane Xander. So I have been told." She smiled then, a real smile that softened her whole face and made her look younger, less burdened. "Your food is good. Your ale is better, but this changes nothing. Tomorrow we still have to settle the matter of the valley." "Tomorrow," Zane agreed. "But tonight you are a guest." Orla nodded and walked away, back to where her bedroll was spread near the oak tree. Zane finished with the fire and went into his house, barred the door more out of habit than fear, and lay down on his own bed. He did not sleep much. He kept thinking about the look in Orla's eyes, the weariness, the hint of a smile. He thought about her band, hungry and hard used, following a leader who was tired of leading. He thought about the valley, green and quiet, and the absurdity of fighting over it. And he thought about what he would cook for breakfast. Morning came cold and clear, with frost on the grass and mist rising from the river. Zane was up before dawn, stoking the fire, putting a pot of porridge on to cook, frying bacon and eggs, baking more bread. The smell of breakfast woke the orcs one by one, and they drifted toward the fire like moths toward a lantern. Orla was the last to rise. She looked like she had slept poorly, and there were new lines of tension around her eyes. She accepted a plate of food from Zane without a word and sat on a stump near the fire, eating in silence while her band chattered and joked and filled their bellies. When everyone had eaten, Orla stood. The chatter stopped. Her people knew that look, the set of her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. This was Orla the warlord, not Orla the weary traveler. "We have delayed long enough," she said. Her voice carried across the clearing, formal and cold. "Zane Xander, you have refused to fight. By the old laws, you forfeit your claim to this valley. You have until the new moon to gather your belongings and leave." Zane set down the pan he had been scrubbing. He wiped his hands on a cloth and walked over to stand in front of Orla. "I have not refused to fight," he said. "I have simply chosen a different battlefield." Orla frowned. "What are you talking about? You said the old laws require me to defend my claim. I am defending it, just not with swords." He gestured toward the table, the remnants of breakfast, her well-fed, well-rested band. "I am defending it with food. Stay another day. Let me cook for you again. If after that you still want to take the valley, then take it, but give me one more day." "This is absurd," Orla said, but she sounded uncertain. "Is it?" Zane looked at her band. "How many of you have eaten this well in the last month?" Silence. Several of the orcs looked down at their feet. "How many of you are tired of fighting over land that no one really wants, just because the old laws say you have to?" More silence. Garak, the scarred warrior, shifted uncomfortably. "Stay," Zane said. "One more day. What is the harm in it?" Orla looked at her people, then back at Zane. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, duty against desire, the old laws against the new possibility. Finally, she said, "One more day, but that is all." "One more day," Zane agreed. He cooked all day, roasted a whole pig over an open fire, slow and patient, basting it with honey and herbs, made a stew with wild mushrooms and cream, baked pies with dried apples and cinnamon, churned butter, pickled vegetables, smoked fish. He worked like a man possessed, and Orla's band watched him with a mixture of fascination and suspicion. Some of them started to help. Garak offered to turn the spit for the pig. A young orc woman named Thora began chopping vegetables without being asked. An older orc man, grizzled and grim, showed Zane a way to season the stew that his grandmother had taught him. Slowly, the camp transformed from an armed encampment into something that looked almost like a community. Orla watched it all from a distance, her expression unreadable. She did not help, but she did not stop her people from helping either. She sat under the oak tree, sharpening her sword, and every now and then Zane would catch her looking at him with that same thoughtful, measuring gaze. Dinner that night was a feast. The whole roasted pig, golden and crackling, took pride of place at the center of the table. Around it, dishes piled high with food enough to feed an army. Zane had outdone himself, and he knew it. This was not just cooking. This was an argument made with fire and spice and patience. They ate until they could not eat anymore, and then they sat around the fire and talked. Not about the valley, not about the old laws, but about small things. Families, memories, places they had been. Garak told a story about a fight he had gotten into with a bear, which everyone agreed was probably exaggerated but entertaining nonetheless. Thora sang a song in the old orc tongue, something mournful and beautiful that made the hair on Zane's arms stand up. Orla sat quietly, listening, and Zane saw something in her face that he had not seen before. Peace, maybe, or the shadow of it. When the fire burned low and her people began to drift off to sleep, Orla stood and walked over to where Zane was sitting, staring into the coals. "You are trying to bribe us," she said. "I am trying to feed you," Zane said. "It is the same thing." "Is it?" Orla sat down beside him. She was close enough that he could smell the leather of her armor, the faint scent of wood smoke in her hair. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "I am making it exactly as hard as it needs to be," Zane said. "You do not want this valley, Orla. You want an end to the fighting. So do I. So I am offering you one, by cooking for us, by showing you that there is another way." He turned to look at her. "You are a good leader, I can see that. Your people follow you because they trust you, not because they fear you. But you are leading them into fights that do not need to happen, over land that does not matter, because the old laws say you have to. What if you just stopped? It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You are the warlord. You make the decisions. If you say the fight is over, then it is over." Orla shook her head. "You do not understand the politics. There are factions within my band. Not everyone agrees with my methods. There is a man, Korath, who thinks I am too soft, too willing to negotiate. He wants the old ways, blood and conquest. If I show weakness, he will challenge me. Then let him challenge you and beat him. It is not that easy. Korath has his own followers. If I fight him and win, I split the band. Half will follow me, half will follow whoever he names as his successor. We will be weaker, divided." She looked at Zane, and there was real pain in her eyes. "I am trying to hold us together. The old laws, the challenges, the fights, they are the only things keeping us from falling apart completely." Zane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What if I could give you a reason to stay that your whole band would accept? Not just you, but all of them, even Korath." "What reason?" "Food." Orla stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I am always serious about food." Zane leaned forward. "Your people are hungry. Not just for one meal, but all the time. I can see it in their faces, the way they eat. You have been on the road for months, living on dried meat and hard bread, fighting over land you cannot even farm because you are too busy fighting over it. What if you stopped fighting and started farming? What if you settled here in the valley and I taught you how to grow your own food? You want us to become farmers. I want you to stop starving." Orla looked away. Her jaw was tight and Zane could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. "My people are warriors. We have been warriors for generations. You are asking us to give up our entire way of life. I am asking you to add to it. You can still be warriors, but you can also be people who eat regularly and sleep in beds and do not have to fight over every scrap of land because you have your own." He reached out and very gently touched her hand. "You are tired, Orla, I can see it. You do not want to fight me, you do not want to fight anyone, you want to rest. So rest. Stay here. Let me help you." Orla looked down at his hand on hers. She did not pull away. For a long moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, the stars wheeling overhead. "One more day," she said finally. "Give me one more day to think about it." "As many days as you need," Zane said. She nodded and stood, pulling her hand gently from his. She walked back to her bedroll without another word, and Zane sat by the fire until it burned down to ash, thinking about what he had started and where it might end. The next morning, Korath made his move. Zane was cooking breakfast when the shouting started. He looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered orc man with a face like a clenched fist striding toward the fire, Orla at his heels, her expression thunderous. "This is madness, Orla," Korath was saying, his voice loud enough to wake anyone who was still asleep. "We have been here 3 days. 3 days of eating this human's food and listening to his soft words. We came here to take the valley, not to be his guests. We came here to settle the matter of the valley according to the old laws," Orla said, her voice cold and controlled. "I am still deciding how to proceed." "You are stalling." Korath stopped and turned to face her, his hand on his sword. "You are weak, Orla. You have always been weak. You talk when you should fight, negotiate when you should conquer. The old laws are clear. The human refused to fight, he forfeited. We should take the valley and be done with it. The old laws also say that the warlord decides how challenges are settled," Orla said. "And I am the warlord, Korath, not you." "For now," Korath said. His smile was ugly. "But how long will the band follow a warlord who cannot make a decision? Who lets a human cook for us like we are beggars at his table?" A murmur ran through the assembled orcs. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Others nodded in agreement. Zane could see the division forming, the fracture Orla had warned him about. He set down the skillet he was holding and walked over to stand beside Orla. "I am not asking you to beg," he said to Korath. "I am offering you partnership. This valley is big enough for all of us. You help me farm it, I help you eat. Everyone wins." Korath turned his ugly smile on Zane. "I do not want your partnership, human. I want your land. And if Orla is too weak to take it, then I will challenge her for leadership and take it myself." "Korath," Orla said, and there was a warning in her voice, but Korath was done listening. He drew his sword, a long, brutal thing that looked like it had tasted blood many times. "I challenge you, Orla Zareth, for leadership of this band. By the old laws you must answer." Orla's hand went to her own sword, but she did not draw it. "I do not want to fight you, Korath." "Then you are weak." "I am practical. If we fight, one of us will die and the band will split. We will be weaker and the valley will still be contested. There is no victory in this for either of us." "There is victory for me," Korath said. He was enjoying this, Zane realized. He liked the fight, the confrontation. This was not about the valley for him. It was about proving he was the strongest, the hardest, the most willing to spill blood. Zane stepped forward. "If you want to fight someone, fight me." Every eye turned to him. Orla looked horrified. Korath looked delighted. "You," Korath laughed. "You are not even a warrior. I would cut you down in seconds." "Probably," Zane agreed. But the old laws say that contested land can be defended by combat. I am defending my land. If you want it, fight me for it. Zane, no, Orla said. Her voice was sharp with fear, but Zane was looking at Korath, measuring him. Unless you are afraid, he said mildly. I understand if a big, strong warrior like you does not want to fight an unarmed cook. It might look bad if you lose. Korath's face went dark with rage. I will kill you. Maybe, Zane said. But if you do, you prove Orla right. You prove that you are nothing but a brute who solves problems with violence. And her people will hate you for it because they like me. I feed them. What do you do for them, Korath? The silence was deafening. Korath looked around, and Zane could see him realizing that the mood had shifted. The other orcs were not looking at him with admiration or agreement. They were looking at him with disgust. He had threatened their host, the man who had given them the best meals they had eaten in months, who had shown them kindness when he could have shown them steel. You are a coward, Korath spat, hiding behind words. I am a cook, Zane said, hiding behind food, and it seems to be working. Garak laughed, a sharp bark of sound that broke the tension. Others joined in, and Korath looked around wildly, his face flushing darker. You are all fools, he snarled. This human is making fools of you, and you are too stupid to see it. The only fool here is you, Korath, Thora said. She stepped forward, her hand on her own weapon. Orla has led us well. She has kept us alive when other bands have fallen apart. And now she is trying to find us a home, a place to rest, and you want to ruin it because you are too proud to admit that fighting is not always the answer. I agree, Garak said. He moved to stand beside Thora. I am tired, Korath. Tired of fighting, tired of sleeping on the ground, tired of being hungry. If Orla says we can have peace here, then I want peace. One by one, the other orcs stepped forward, aligning themselves with Orla. Not all of them, there were a few who stayed near Korath, loyal or too afraid to break away, but the majority. The message was clear. Korath looked at Orla. This is not over. Yes, it is, Orla said. Her voice was quiet but absolute. You have made your challenge and the band has answered. They follow me. If you cannot accept that, then leave. Take your followers and go. But if you stay, you follow my leadership, and my decision is that we are staying here. We are accepting Zane's offer. We are going to stop fighting and start building. Korath's hand tightened on his sword. For a moment, Zane thought he might actually attack, might force the issue into bloodshed. But then he looked around again, saw the faces of the orcs who had chosen Orla over him, and something in him seemed to deflate. You will regret this, he said. Then he turned and strode toward his horse, his few remaining followers trailing behind him. They mounted and rode out of the valley without looking back, and Zane watched them go with a mixture of relief and unease. That could have gone better, he said. Orla let out a long breath. She looked shaken but also relieved. Thank you, she said, for offering to fight him. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Zane said. But I meant what I said. This valley is big enough for all of us. If you are willing to stay to work with me, then it is yours as much as mine. Orla looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her people, the ones who had stayed, who had chosen peace over endless war. We will stay, she said. But I do not know how to farm, Zane. I am a warrior. We are all warriors. Then I will teach you, Zane said. It is easier than fighting, and the food is better. Garak laughed again, and this time the tension broke for good. The orcs began to disperse, talking among themselves, already planning, already imagining a future that did not involve fighting for every scrap. Orla stayed where she was, looking at Zane. You really won the war, she said, without fighting a single battle. I told you, Zane said. I am a very good cook. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. Yes, you are. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Zane had not been exaggerating when he said the valley was big enough for everyone, but turning a war band into a farming community was harder than he had anticipated. The orcs were willing, but they were also completely inexperienced. Garak nearly killed himself trying to use a plow. Thora planted seeds so deep they would never see sunlight. And one unfortunate incident involving a goat and a well-meaning orc named Brog had convinced Zane that livestock management needed to be taught very, very carefully. But they learned. Slowly, clumsily, with a lot of cursing and more than a few injuries, they learned. Zane taught them how to turn the soil, how to read the weather, how to tell when plants were ready to harvest. He taught them how to preserve food for the winter, how to smoke meat, how to make cheese. He taught them patience, which was perhaps the hardest lesson of all for people who had spent their lives solving problems with immediate, violent action. And he cooked. Every night, he cooked a meal for the entire community. And every night, they gathered around the long table under the oak tree and ate together. It became a ritual, a moment of peace in the chaos of building a new life. Humans from the surrounding farms began to trickle in, curious about the orcs who were suddenly planting crops instead of raiding them. Some came with suspicion, some with hostility, but Zane invited them all to eat, and it was hard to hate people who were passing you bread and laughing at your jokes. Orla worked harder than anyone. She was up before dawn and did not stop until well after dark, learning alongside her people, making mistakes, getting dirty. Zane watched her transform from a weary warlord into something else, something he did not have a word for yet. She was still strong, still commanding, but the hardness was leaving her, replaced by something softer, more open. They talked every night by the fire after the others had gone to bed. Small conversations at first about the day's work, about plans for the next planting. But gradually, they became deeper. Orla told him about her childhood, growing up in a war band, learning to fight before she could read. She told him about the burden of leadership, the constant weight of making decisions that affected everyone, the fear of failing her people. She told him about her father, a great warrior who had died in a pointless skirmish over a river crossing, and how she had sworn she would be smarter, better, would find a way to end the cycle of violence. Zane told her about the border wars, about the friends he had lost, the waste of it all. He told her about coming home to the valley, about the quiet peace he had found in growing things instead of destroying them. He told her about his father, a hard man who had loved the land more than people, and how Zane had vowed to be different, to find connection where his father had found only solitude. They were sitting by the fire one night, late in the autumn, when Orla said, "I think I am falling in love with you." Zane looked at her, startled. She was staring into the fire, her profile sharp and beautiful in the flickering light. "I did not mean to," she continued. "It is inconvenient and complicated and probably a terrible idea, but I think it is happening anyway." Zane set down the cup he was holding. His heart was pounding and he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into something vast and unknown. "I think I am falling in love with you too," he said. Orla turned to look at him. "Really, really." "That is inconvenient, very." They stared at each other. Then slowly, Orla smiled. "What do we do about it?" "I have no idea," Zane admitted. "I have never been in love with an orc warlord before." "And I have never been in love with a human cook," Orla said. She reached out and took his hand, her grip warm and strong. "But I think I would like to try." "Try what?" "This, us, whatever this is." Zane looked down at their joined hands. His was scarred from years of kitchen work, hers from years of battle. They were so different, and yet they fit together like they had been made for each other. "I would like that too," he said. They sat there for a long time, holding hands, watching the fire burn down to embers. And when they finally stood to go to their separate beds, Orla kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted like wood smoke and hope. Winter came, and with it, challenges. The orcs had never prepared for a winter before, not like this. They had always moved with the seasons, raiding and trading for what they needed. Now they were settled, and the reality of storing enough food to last through the cold months was daunting. Zane worked them hard, teaching them to preserve everything, to waste nothing. They smoked fish, dried fruit, pickled vegetables, stored grain, salted meat. The root cellar was filled to bursting, and still Zane worried it would not be enough. But it was. When the snows came and the valley was blanketed in white, they were ready. The community huddled together, humans and orcs side by side, sharing warmth and food and stories. It was not easy. There were arguments, cultural misunderstandings, moments of real tension, but they worked through it. Zane mediated disputes, cooked comfort food, reminded everyone why they were doing this. Orla was his partner in all of it. She enforced rules, kept the peace, made the hard decisions when they needed to be made. They worked together like a well-oiled machine, and Zane found himself marveling at how natural it felt, how right. Their relationship deepened over the long winter nights. They moved slowly, carefully, both aware of the eyes watching them, the judgment from both sides. Humans who thought Zane was betraying his kind, orcs who thought Orla was lowering herself. But they ignored the whispers and built something real between them. They talked for hours, learned each other's languages, traded stories and dreams. They kissed by the fire and held each other through cold nights, and Zane felt a contentment he had never known before. Spring came with a rush of green and the promise of new beginnings. The orcs, now seasoned farmers, attacked the planting with the same ferocity they had once brought to battle. The fields were tilled and seeded, and the whole valley seemed to hum with life and possibility. And then Korath came back. He rode in on a misty morning at the head of a force 3 times the size of Orla's original band. Orcs from other clans, mercenaries, malcontents. All of them armed, all of them hungry, and all of them looking at the green valley like it was a prize to be taken. Zane was in the field when the warning shout went up. He dropped his hoe and ran toward the main house, where Orla was already standing, her hand on her sword, her face grim. "Korath," she said, "I should have known he would come back." "What does he want?" Zane asked. "The valley." "Revenge, to prove I was wrong." Orla looked at the approaching force, and Zane could see her doing the math, counting heads, assessing odds. "We cannot fight them, Zane. We are farmers now, not warriors. We would be slaughtered." "Then we do not fight," Zane said. "You want to surrender, I want to cook." Orla looked at him like he had lost his mind. "What? It worked before, did it not?" Zane was already moving, heading toward the outdoor kitchen. "We fed your band and they chose peace. Maybe we can do the same with his. Zane, there are 60 of them, maybe more. We do not have enough food to feed an army." "Yes, we do." Zane gestured toward the fields, the livestock, the storehouses. "We have been preparing for winter. We have more food than we need. If we are going to lose the valley anyway, we might as well go out feeding people." Orla stared at him, then she started to laugh, a wild, disbelieving sound. "You are insane." "Probably," Zane agreed. "But I am also right. Tell Korath we will feed his people. Tell him we challenge him to a different kind of contest, his way against our way. If after the meal his people still want to fight, we surrender. But if they choose peace, he leaves and never comes back. He will never agree to that. Then we are no worse off than we are now." Orla looked at him, and he saw the moment she decided to trust him, to believe in the impossible. She nodded. "I will make the offer." She walked out to meet Korath, alone and unarmed, and Zane watched from a distance as they talked. He could not hear the words, but he could see Korath's face, the sneer, the contempt. He could see Orla standing tall, refusing to back down. And then, to his surprise, he saw Korath laugh and nod. Orla came back, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. He agreed. He thinks it is funny watching us scramble. He thinks his people are too loyal, too hungry for conquest, to be swayed by food. He is giving us until sunset. Then we had better get cooking, Zane said. He rallied the community. Every orc, every human, everyone who could chop vegetables or stir a pot or tend a fire. They worked like people possessed, pulling out every scrap of stored food, every bit of preserved meat, every jar of pickles and every wheel of cheese. Zane directed them like a general, assigning tasks, coordinating efforts. They roasted whole sheep, baked hundreds of loaves of bread, made vats of stew and mountains of roasted vegetables. They tapped the ale barrels and the cider barrels, set up tables in the field, built bonfires to cook over. Korath's people watched from a distance, amused and contemptuous. But as the smells began to drift across the field, Zane saw them start to shift, to lean forward, to lick their lips. They were hungry. They had been riding hard, living on rations. The smell of real food, good food, was a siren call. When everything was ready, Zane walked out to the middle of the field and shouted, "Dinner is served. Everyone is welcome." Korath's people looked at him, then at Korath. Korath laughed. "Go ahead. Eat the humans' food, see if it changes anything." They came slowly at first, suspicious and wary. But hunger won over suspicion, and soon they were crowding around the tables, filling their plates, shoving food into their mouths with the single-minded intensity of the truly starving. Zane and his people kept bringing more food, refilling plates, pouring drinks. They treated Korath's war band the same way they had treated Orla's, with warmth and generosity and no trace of fear. And slowly, the mood began to change. The orcs started to talk to each other, to the humans, asking questions about the valley, the crops, how they had managed to produce so much food. Garak and Thora moved among them, telling stories, explaining, inviting them to see the fields, the storehouses, the livestock. Zane found himself standing next to a young orc woman with wide eyes and a half-empty plate. "This is the best food I have ever eaten," she said. "Thank you," Zane said. "If you stay, I can teach you how to make it." She looked at him, startled. "Stay, the valley is big. There is room for more farmers. If you want to put down your sword and pick up a plow, you are welcome here." She looked around at the tables laden with food, at the orcs and humans eating together, at the green fields stretching toward the horizon. "I will think about it," she said. By sunset, the mood had shifted completely. Korath's war band was sprawled in the grass, full and content, talking and laughing with Orla's people. They looked less like a conquering army and more like guests at a festival. Korath himself sat alone, his face dark with fury. He had seen it happening, the slow dissolution of his people's loyalty, and he had been powerless to stop it. How could he compete with full bellies and warm hospitality? Orla walked over to him. Zane followed, and together they stood in front of the orc who had come to destroy them. "Your people have eaten," Orla said. "The sun has set. By the terms of the agreement, you must ask them what they choose, your way or ours." Korath stood. He looked around at his war band, and Zane could see the desperation in his eyes. "Who stands with me?" he shouted. "Who is ready to take this valley and show these soft fools what real strength looks like?" Silence. Not a single orc moved. "You cowards," Korath spat. "You would let a human and a traitor warlord buy you with food. It is good food," one of the orcs said mildly. A ripple of laughter followed. "You are pathetic," Korath snarled. "All of you. We are tired. the young orc woman said. She stood up facing Korath. Tired of fighting, tired of being hungry, tired of following leaders who care more about glory than our lives. This human offered us a home. You offered us more war. I choose the home. So do I, said another orc, then another, then a dozen more. Within minutes, every member of Korath's war band had declared for Orla and Zane, and Korath stood alone, abandoned by the people he had led into battle. This is not over, Korath said, his voice shaking with rage. Yes, it is, Orla said. She drew her sword and Korath flinched, but she did not attack. Instead, she drove the blade into the ground at his feet. Take your sword and go, Korath. You are not welcome here. If you come back, if you threaten my people or this valley again, I will kill you. Do you understand? Korath looked at her, at the sword, at the sea of faces turned against him. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, his head down. He mounted his horse and rode out of the valley, and Zane knew, watching him go, that they would not see him again. The orcs who had come with Korath stayed. They joined the community, learned to farm, became part of the strange, wonderful experiment that was taking root in the valley. The war was over, won not with swords but with bread and stew and the simple, radical act of feeding your enemies until they became your friends. That night, the whole valley celebrated. They built a bonfire that reached toward the stars, and they danced and sang and ate until they could not eat any more. Zane stood at the edge of the firelight, watching, feeling a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Orla came to stand beside him. She took his hand, and he squeezed it gently. You did it, she said. You won the war. We did it, Zane corrected. You and me and everyone here, we chose a different way and it worked. It should not have worked, Orla said. She sounded awed. By every rule I know, we should be dead or scattered, but we are here, we are whole. We are happy. Sometimes the old rules are wrong, Zane said. He turned to look at her. I love you, Orla Zareth, she smiled, and it was like the sun coming up. I love you too, Zane Xander. They kissed there in the firelight, and the whole valley cheered. It was a moment of pure joy, uncomplicated and perfect, and Zane held on to it, memorizing every detail, knowing that this was the beginning of something beautiful. The seasons turned. The valley prospered. The orcs became skilled farmers, and the humans learned to see them as neighbors instead of enemies. Trade routes opened up, and the valley became known as a place of plenty, where anyone was welcome as long as they were willing to work. Zane and Orla were married in the spring, under the oak tree where they had first shared a meal. It was a simple ceremony, a blending of human and orc traditions, and it felt right in a way that nothing else ever had. They spoke vows of partnership, of love, of building a life together, and when they kissed, the valley erupted in cheers. They built a house together, a sturdy thing with a big kitchen and a fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. They filled it with laughter and warmth and the smell of good food, and it became the heart of the community, the place where everyone gathered for meals and meetings and celebrations. Years passed. The valley grew. More people came, drawn by the promise of peace and plenty. Humans and orcs, working side by side, building something new. There were challenges, of course. Prejudice did not disappear overnight, and there were moments of tension, of misunderstanding. But they worked through it together, guided by the principles Zane and Orla had established. Feed people, treat them with respect, and most problems solved themselves. Zane continued to cook, and Orla continued to lead, and together they built a community that was stronger than any army. They faced droughts and hard winters, bandits and disease, but they faced it all together and they endured. And then, on a bright autumn morning, Orla told Zane she was pregnant. He stared at her, stunned into silence. Then he laughed, a wild, joyful sound, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing too, breathless and happy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, still not quite believing it. "We are going to have a baby," Orla agreed. Their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy, squalling infant with green skin and her father's dark eyes. They named her Kira, which meant light in the old orc tongue, and she was the first child born of a human-orc union in the valley, a symbol of everything they had built. Kira grew up surrounded by love and plenty, learning to cook at her father's side and to lead at her mother's. She was clever and kind and fiercely independent, and Zane watched her with a pride so deep it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. 2 years later, Orla gave birth to another daughter whom they named Kessa. Kessa was quieter than her sister, thoughtful and observant, with a gift for growing things that rivaled Zane's own. The two girls were inseparable, and they brought a joy to the house that Zane had not known was possible. The valley continued to grow. More children were born, human and orc and everything in between. The old prejudices faded, replaced by a new understanding, a new way of seeing the world. It was not perfect, nothing ever was, but it was good, and it was theirs. On a cool autumn evening, many years after that first fateful meeting, Zane and Orla sat under the oak tree, watching the sun set over the valley. Their daughters were grown now, with children of their own, and the valley was full of life and laughter. "You ever think about how it started?" Orla asked. She was leaning against Zane, her head on his shoulder, and he could feel the warmth of her, the solid reality of her presence. "All the time," Zane said. "You rode in here demanding I fight, and I offered you dinner instead." "It was a good dinner," Orla said. "It was a great dinner," Zane corrected. He smiled. "I am a very good cook." Orla laughed. "You are. You won the war with food. Who does that?" "Someone who does not like fighting," Zane said. "And someone who believes that people are better when they are fed." "You were right," Orla said softly. "About all of it. The old ways were wrong. Fighting did not solve anything. But this, what we built here, this is real. This lasts." Zane kissed the top of her head. "We built it together." "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. The valley was quiet, peaceful, and Zane felt a contentment that ran bone deep. He had found his place, his purpose, his love. He had turned enemies into friends, war into peace, hunger into plenty. And he had done it all with the simplest tools: patience, generosity, and really good food. The harvest festival was the next day, and the entire valley would gather for the great communal feast they held every year. It had become a tradition, a celebration of everything they had accomplished, a reminder of where they had come from and where they were going. Zane had been preparing for weeks, planning the menu, coordinating with the other cooks, making sure there would be enough food for everyone. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright. Zane was up before the sun, lighting fires, starting the first dishes. Orla joined him, moving through the familiar routines they had established over decades of working side by side. Their daughters and grandchildren trickled in, offering to help, and soon the whole extended family was working together, chopping and stirring and tasting. By midday, the tables were set up in the field, long rows of them stretching from one end of the valley to the other. Every family contributed dishes, and the array of food was staggering. Roasted meats and fresh bread, pies and stews, salads and cheeses, fruits and sweets. It was a feast fit for kings, but it was for everyone, orc and human, old and young, rich and poor. The people began to arrive in the early afternoon, filling the field with laughter and conversation. Children ran between the tables, playing games, while adults caught up with friends and neighbors. The air was filled with the smell of food and the sound of joy, and Zane stood at the edge of it all, marveling at what they had created. Orla found him there, slipping her hand into his. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Always," Zane said. Together, they walked to the head of the table, the place of honor. As they took their seats, the crowd quieted and all eyes turned to them. Zane stood, raising his cup. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice carried across the field, strong and clear. "We gather here today to celebrate the harvest, to give thanks for the bounty of the valley, and to remember how we came to be here. Many years ago, this valley was contested land, a place of conflict and bloodshed. But we chose a different path. We chose to build instead of destroy, to feed instead of fight, to love instead of hate, and look at what we have created." He gestured around them at the assembled crowd, the laden tables, the green fields beyond. "This is not just a valley. This is a home, a community, a family. And it exists because we chose to see each other not as enemies, but as people. Because we chose to share our bread and our lives. Because we chose peace." He raised his cup higher. "To the valley, to the harvest, to all of us, and to the future we are building together. To the valley." The crowd roared back, raising their own cups. Zane sat down and Orla squeezed his hand under the table. "Well said," she murmured. "I've had a lot of practice," Zane said. The feast began, and it was everything Zane had hoped it would be. Food and laughter and music, people coming together in joy and gratitude. He watched his grandchildren playing with orc children, indistinguishable in their happiness, and he felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the field, Orla leaned close to Zane. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For believing in this. For believing in me. For showing me that there was another way." Zane turned to look at her, this woman he had loved for so many years, this partner who had walked beside him through everything. Her face was lined now, her hair streaked with gray, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You did not need me to show you," he said. "You already knew. You just needed someone to remind you." "Then thank you for reminding me," Orla said. She kissed him, soft and sweet, and Zane tasted the future in that kiss, all the years still to come, all the meals still to share, all the love still to give. The festival went on late into the night, and when it finally ended and the last guests had drifted away, Zane and Orla walked back to their house hand in hand, tired and happy. They stood on the porch, looking out over the valley, and Zane thought about how far they had come, how much they had built, how much they had loved. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every moment, every challenge, every meal. I would do it all again just to end up here with you." "So would I," Orla said. She rested her head on his shoulder. "We won the war, Zane, we really did." "Yes," Zane said. "We did." And as they stood there, watching the stars wheel overhead, Zane felt a gratitude so deep it filled every part of him. He had lived a good life. He had loved well and been loved in return. He had turned enemies into family and war into peace. He had fed the hungry and built a home and left the world better than he had found it. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.